Apologies, everybody. I'm working through a few technical things that apparently I do not quite understand how to do, but I will figure it out. Just give me another couple moments.
There's a war going on in the streets of our cities, a battle royale, and it ain't very pretty. And all you can do is send us your thoughts and prayers. How many deaths will it take till we know those damn politicians? It's all just a show. The best they can do is send us their thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers won't stop the next victim's pain. Thoughts and prayers, when you're all done praying, fix this mess that you made.
Are you gonna do something?
In a church, at a school, or a country rock show, military weapons, a ton of ammo. Yet all you can do is send us your thoughts and
I logged
prayers.
into the meeting, but I don't know.
I've heard it all before. Guns don't kill. Tell that to the mother whose child is lying still. Be sure and send her all of your thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers won't stop the next victim's pain. Thoughts and prayers, when you're all done praying, fix this mess that you made. Now that time has passed and people moved on, you hope we all forget, but you're so very wrong. 'Cause we're tired of receiving all of your thoughts and prayers. Another shot rang out late last night, so please take a stand and just do what is right. Do more than send us all your thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers won't stop the next victim's pain. Thoughts and prayers. When you're all done praying, fix this mess that you made. Thoughts and prayers won't stop the next victim's pain. Thoughts and prayers. When you're all done praying, all done saying, stop the slaying, fix this mess that you made. Fix this mess that you made. There's
Good evening, everyone. Sorry for that being a little bit glitchy this evening. I'm trying to handle all the technical issues myself, and I am not necessarily completely proficient at it. So apologies if it's not coming across very smoothly at the moment. Good evening and welcome. I am Karen Herron. This is Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence's annual Legislative 101. Hold on, I still have people to admit. Again, my name is Karen Herron. I am the Executive Director of Marylanders, MPGV for short. We are joined this evening by, or we will be joined this evening by Governor Moore's Chief Legislative Officer, Eric Ludke, and Delegate of Maryland General Assembly, Sandy Bartlett. Before we get started, though, I need to cover a few housekeeping items. First, there is a poll. Hopefully you can see it, which you can access by, if you can't see it, you should be able to access it by clicking the poll quiz button at the bottom of your screen. If you have not already, please complete the poll while I finish up these introductory remarks. This program, well, actually, this program is not being live streamed to Facebook because that was a bit of technicality that I failed at. So it is being recorded for access later. Please reach out to us if you need or would like to access it, or if somebody in your organizations would like to do so. In order to optimize the views of the speakers and the information being shared, I do ask that attendees turn your cameras off and keep your microphones muted. I have 3 critical helpers here this evening. Our communications director, Bonnie Schofield, and invaluable volunteers, Clint Wolcott and Gabby LaVerghetta. They are going to be monitoring the chat, and they're going to be assisting me in maintaining decorum and answering questions. There may be a few minutes at the end of the program. For some questions, but we do have a fairly tight schedule. So please either put your questions in the chat or reserve them to the end. I'll try to follow up after the event if we don't get to things that people had questions about. I encourage you also to consider joining us. We have calls on Fridays at 10. For our regular volunteers, where we can talk further about what is going on and how you can get more involved. If you would like to join that call, pop your information in the chat again, and we can get you more details on how to do that. Lastly, and hopefully unnecessarily, there will be no second chances on decorum. As you can see, I'm trying to juggle all the different elements to putting this whole thing together from a technological standpoint. So any disruptions, you will be removed from the event. As a final bit of housekeeping, we provide this event annually to our supporters without charge. We do ask that you consider supporting our legislative activities by donating. If you're interested in doing so, you can go to www.mdpgv.org and clicking on the Donate tab. So let's see if we can end the poll. All right, let's see who we have here this evening. So we do have some gun violence survivors. We have people who have lost loved ones to gun violence. Lots of people care deeply about this issue. I actually expected we'd get some people from the gun owners or just trying to see what we were talking about. Maybe they either are and don't want to admit it or aren't willing to put themselves out there. And we have at least one legislator at the moment. Is that, let's see, Senator Hester? Perhaps. I think I saw you enter. Well, welcome to everyone. There are the polling results if you're interested. Okay, so I'm going to close that down. I think I'm doing that properly. Make sure there's nobody waiting in the waiting room. Okay. All right, so regardless of what brings you here this evening, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here to learn more about our organization and about how you can help us work toward our goals of a more peaceful Maryland. What we want to do here tonight is I'll tell you a little bit more about who I am and what MPGV is, as well as our legislative priorities for 2023. This program is designed to be primarily information sharing, letting you know what we are working on and providing you with some tools and resources to be involved citizens of the legislative process. We will be providing you updates on what gun violence and gun violence policy looks like in 2023. And for those who may be less familiar with the legislative process, we want to make Annapolis a little less of a mystery and more accessible to you as a citizen. Legislatively, we will be focusing on how the state of Maryland needs to address the Supreme Court's decision in New York versus New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which impacted the public carry of firearms permitting process that we've had in place in Maryland for around 50 years. We want to do this by making sure that the Maryland State Police has the tools that they need to be able to effectively vet applicants, that places that are deemed too sensitive for firearms be clearly enumerated in the law, and by codifying what responsible gun ownership looks like through safe storage and child access prevention. I will go over all of that, but in more detail, but right now, who we are. So Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence is a state-level gun violence prevention organization, nonprofit organization. For those of you familiar with the nonprofit structure, we are both a C3 and a C4 nonprofit. Our C3 work focuses on education in and around gun violence prevention and includes the support of a small program in Baltimore called the Liberty Elementary Grief Support Group. That provides counseling and general support to elementary-aged children who have experienced some impactful loss or exposure to violence in their young lives. And we also lead the Maryland Violence Prevention Coalition, where we bring together many of the organizations around the state that operate in ways to support victims of gun violence, address violence problems head on, and reduce violence in its many forms. My name is Karen Herron. I am the executive director. I am a lawyer by education and spent about 7 years as a practicing attorney before stepping away when my children were young. On December 14th, 2012, my youngest child was in his first grade classroom here in Maryland as I watched the events of Sandy Hook unfold on my television. I have not been able to look away from the gun violence problem in America since that day. In 2015, I helped start a Start with Hello program at my children's elementary school through the organization Sandy Hook Promise. That program is designed to teach children social skills needed to cultivate a kind, caring, and accepting social infrastructure so that no matter our differences, we find ways to nurture and support each other in our day-to-day lives. I'm happy to say that that program was the first in Howard County and is still operating today 8 years later. I've been with Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence since about 2019, first as a volunteer and then as legislative director. I am new to the role of executive director as of this week, actually, which I will address a little bit later. I am really excited about the legislative outlook for 2023. The years since the Sandy Hook tragedy have been all about building the infrastructure needed to enact big change in moments of opportunity. With supporters now leading both legislative branches and the governor's house in 2023, we are in one of those moments of opportunity here in Maryland. Gun violence is a big, complicated problem, and one that will not be solved by any one thing. We are more aware than ever of the many deficiencies in access to opportunity that contribute to violence. But all the work in all those areas will only go so far without addressing the elephant in the room: guns. So most of what we are going to be talking about tonight focuses on that. But please know that we work on, we support the efforts of others in their work on the root causes of gun violence as well. And with that, I have somebody in the waiting room who I'll let in, and I will reshare my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. So Maryland, gun violence. I'll begin by talking about what gun violence looks like in Maryland and in the United States more broadly. According to the CDC, between 2011 and 2020, the rate of gun deaths has increased 46% in Maryland. This is compared to an increase nationwide of 33%. Gun suicide in Maryland increased 2%, and gun homicide increased 81%. Nationwide, as a comparison, those numbers are 12% for suicide and 70% for homicide. Gun violence is now the #1 cause of death for children in both the United States and more broadly and specifically within the state of Maryland. By any metric, these are unacceptable numbers. The United States accounts for the vast majority of gun violence amongst high-income countries and territories with populations of 10 million or more. There are an estimated 857 million firearms in civilian hands in the world, with 393 million of those in the United States. No other country even comes close. So while gun violence is a complicated issue disproportionately affecting people of color, and while there are many non-gun related things that we need to do in Maryland to reduce harm and to provide pathways to opportunity and success, reducing the ease of access to firearms must be a critical component of any plan to reduce gun violence. Despite what some would argue, reducing access to guns is not the same as denying a constitutional right. Very rarely do gun laws attempt to take away firearms or prevent anyone from going through the proper channels to legally acquire a gun. But gun regulation has been around as long as there have been guns in this land, because it was clear from the early days of what eventually became the United States, too easy access to lethal weapons was not a pathway to a society that anyone wanted. Just as an example, you should be looking at a photo of Dodge City, Kansas around 1878, where the signage posted reads, "The carrying of firearms strictly prohibited." There is a narrative that the West was once a wild, lawless, gun-mad place. Much of this is perpetuated by the entertainment industry's portrayal of that time period. Very like how much of today's entertainment does not actually reflect the reality in which people live. Movies and TV shows set in the late 1800s to early 19th century were in fact entertainment and not an accurate portrayal of history. Imagine, if you will, if John Wick or Kill Bill were somehow used someday used to assess civilization of the 21st century. But I'm sure you're now wondering, why in the world have I gone off on this tangent of gun law history? Let me explain. In the summer of 2022, the Supreme Court handed down the decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. In that decision, they did two critical things that are impacting us now. They decided that states could no longer require that a gun owner have a reason in order to qualify for a permit to carry firearms in public. And they changed the long-standing test that gun laws were put to when determining whether or not they are constitutional. They created a new test in which one must determine whether the restriction, first, doesn't violate the text of the Second Amendment, and second, that it has an analog that is well established in American history. Some argue that the Supreme Court narrowed that time frame to a span between 1791, when the Second Amendment was ratified, and about 1868, when the 14th Amendment was ratified. The impact of this decision was felt in Maryland almost immediately. Governor Hogan and the Maryland State Police lifted the restriction currently in the law that an applicant for a public carry permit in Maryland needed to have a good and substantial reason for carrying the firearm in public. Prior to this, many permits in Maryland were allowed for particular circumstances, such as carrying when transporting business funds to a bank, for example, but not allowed all of the time. These restricted permits were immediately affected and turned into full permits to carry firearms in public. We actually don't know how many of these there were because Maryland State Police does not keep that data. What we do know is that there was a 332% increase in permits granted in 2022 compared to the year before. And when compared to the prior year's trend, that percentage is even higher. Breaking that down, 2021 saw 18,667 public carry permits granted, and 2022 saw 80,601 permits granted. Research indicates more firearms in public spaces leads to more gun violence. From unintentional discharges like the one that occurred at Arundel Mills Mall this past October, to road rage incidents like the one in Pikesville in November that claimed the life of a 29-year-old truck driver, to vigilante deadly force being deployed against an unmarked police vehicle in December, guns carried into public spaces leads to more gun violence. There are two areas that will be addressed this legislative session that are a direct response to the Bruin decision. First, we need to stop some gaps in the permitting process. The Maryland Public Carry Permitting System allows the Maryland State Police to vet applicants for appropriateness for carrying firearms in public. This includes investigating the applicant for indications of a propensity for violence. Right now, this includes a background check, but we submit that there are some areas of criminal law that need to be strengthened, especially when it comes to domestic violence. In some situations, we hold a defendant less accountable when the victim of their violence is a domestic partner, even though the same behavior towards someone outside the family would warrant stricter punishment. Those instances of domestic violence type behavior are exactly the kind of thing that we want to make sure that MSP is allowed to consider when vetting the appropriateness of publicly carrying firearms. Furthermore, we want to make sure that the training requirements are elevated to take into consideration the different circumstances that public carry warrants. Maryland State Police, for instance, their recruits spend a solid 2 weeks of their 26-week academy training devoted to firearm training, mastering both a Glock 2240 caliber handgun and a patrol shotgun. Using a gun responsibly in a public setting is a huge responsibility, and not everyone is cut out for it. The training should be complete. The second area concerns where we allow permit holders to carry firearms. We want to codify places that the public would expect to be free from firearms. Schools, government buildings, healthcare facilities, gaming establishments are just a few examples. The Supreme Court in the Bruin decision emphasized that there are places where the public carry of firearms is simply inappropriate. These need to be codified into our law to eliminate any ambiguity. We don't have bill numbers yet. We do expect Senator Waldstreicher is likely to be the Senate sponsor. In fact, he has introduced SB 1, which may end up becoming the key locations-based legislation that we're supporting. Those areas may be folded into 2 or more pieces of legislation, at least initially. We will share bill numbers with you as the pieces start coming together. And in addition to those 2 pieces, we are also prioritizing Jalen's Law, or child access prevention, which, as many of you know, we've been working on for 5 years now. One second, there are people in the waiting room. Sorry about that. I think we are joined tonight. I know she was planning to be on the call, and I don't expect you to speak up, but by Jalen's mom, Melissa, who has dedicated so much of her time and herself to try to prevent what happened to her child from happening to others. In March of 2018, a high school student at St. Mary's High School in Southern Maryland acquired an unsecured firearm from his home and brought it to school, where he shot and killed 16-year-old Jalen and injured another student. In fact, 75% of school shooters acquire their firearms in their own homes or that of a friend or relative. And in at least half of the shootings, the firearm was easily accessible or poorly stored. As minors are not allowed to legally purchase firearms in Maryland, teens in possession of firearms is largely an issue of adult irresponsibility, and one that can be effectively improved by elevating the role of unloading and locking firearms when they are not in the immediate control of the owner. In the years since Jalen's death, firearms have become the #1 cause of death for Maryland youth. And while unsecured guns are not the only reason for all of this, a significant number are directly tied to an adult failing to act responsibly. These are entirely preventable acts. This year, given the spikes in public permitting and gun sales more generally, we really want to emphasize that all gun owners should be storing their firearms unloaded and locked, and that when or if a gun owner allows a minor or an otherwise prohibited person to gain access, that they be held to account for that. The new legislation is also allowing for funds to provide for public education of the new law and the risks of failing to properly store firearms. I need to stop sharing my screen now. We are joined this evening, I think I saw that she was here, by the bill sponsor for Jalen's Law, Delegate Sandy Bartlett. Delegate Bartlett hails from District 32 in Anne Arundel County. She was first elected to the House in 2018 and has served on the Judiciary Committee since 2019. In addition to her tenure in the House, she is a practicing attorney. She has previously been a co-lead on child access prevention, but is taking the lead this year and has spearheaded some key changes to the legislation. Delegate Bartlett, thank you for being here and for sponsoring Jalen's Law. Would you like to tell us a little more about why you've decided to lead this effort and anything that those on this call can do to support you in that?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all again this year. I believe I had the opportunity last year, and it's good to be back. It's not good to be back for the same reason, but it is good to see your faces. So as Karen mentioned, I am the lead support for the bill this year with respect to child access prevention and safe gun storage, which we are also calling Jalen's Law. Delegate Stein was the previous bill sponsor. He is still 100% on board. We're just trying everything we possibly can to try to get the bill passed. And since I sit in judiciary and I was number 2, I thought, well, let's just switch the names and see if that'll do it. So hopefully, that could be a factor. We don't know at this point. We just want the bill passed. And why do we want the bill passed? Because As Karen mentioned, we outlined safe storage. We also outlined that there's certain people who we know are already prohibited from having a gun because of various, maybe there's a violation in the law that they've had previously, or they have in some way proven that they should not have access to a gun. Well, we are including that this year. We're including prohibited persons, and we're including them because it wasn't outlined in the bill before. So we just want to make it as crystal clear as we possibly can that the goal of this particular bill, or the goal of the change in the law, are have really several components. This bill does not have a bill number yet. However, it will soon. And Karen is very much in communication with me and I with her. So as soon as we get the bill number, we will let you all know. So we want to make sure that minors can't get access to the guns. We know that there's several things that can happen. You know, unfortunately, we've seen situations where a 6-year-old brought a gun to school. We've seen, 14-year-olds bring a gun to school. And, on the one hand, we can't say that children are having more mental health problems due to COVID and not having the human interaction. But on the other hand, we say that's a problem, but we're going to give easier access to guns. No, that doesn't make sense. That's very illogical. What we want to say is we love you, children. We care about you, children. We want to protect you. So what we're going to do is we're going to store our guns properly so that you don't have access to them, so that you're not having a bad day and say, you know what, forget it. I want to end my life and others. We all know the emotional roller coaster that exists in being a child. So we don't want to want anyone to in any way try to change how to try to affect change in their conflict with someone by through gun violence, because there are other means, which is the reason why we have in here an education piece. We want to establish funding so that we can educate on suicide prevention. We're giving the Department of Health the authority and the funding to come up with suicide prevention, to educate individuals, to go into the school system, to talk about conflict resolution. So that's a little bit different than what we've done before. We did have the suicide prevention piece in here before, but we've even gone a little bit farther than we did then. We're also requiring the department to put the guide on the website, the suicide prevention guide on their website, as well as share it with the Department of Juvenile Services, firearm dealers, local health departments, as I mentioned, local schools. We're doing everything that we can think of and more, because as Karen mentioned, there are other bills to save our children, to end gun violence, to protect each other, and to not make guns so readily available. The applications for guns after the Bruin decision and after the governor's executive order went up 900%. Yes, folks, 900% for applications to get a gun. Now, let me tell you how that works. Unfortunately, it is infectious, because now what happens is you think, oh, shoot, my neighbor has a gun. I better protect myself. Or this person has a gun. I better protect myself. The problem is that while you are protecting yourself, are you protecting your children? Are you storing your firearm properly? Are you also storing your ammunition properly? Are you putting a lock on your gun so that it is not so easily used? And that so that you can put a combination in. There's various methods in which we have considered as safe gun storage. All we're saying is utilize safe gun storage. utilize what is already a standard of safe gun storage. I was listening to testimony in the Senate last year, and you have folks come in and they say, oh, I teach this all the time. I teach it all the time. Well, that's good. I'm glad you do. But not everyone is doing it. Studies have shown that over 50% of gun owners are not storing their guns properly. And we all know, and we've all seen instances in which a child gains access to the gun and goes off and either injures someone or kills someone. Now we've ruined 2 lives, or as many lives were involved in the shooting. We've ruined that kid's life, okay? Because now that child has that to deal with, because that child is a victim, and we've ruined all the lives of the victims and their families who would have to deal with gun violence. I know that some of you all are victims of gun violence or have experienced gun violence in some way. If not you, your family member, and my condolences go out to you. I want you to know that we are working hard to try to get this bill passed, as Karen said, and I'm going to do everything I possibly can. Delegate Stein as well. And we also have Chairman Will Smith from the Judicial Proceedings, who is the cross-file or the Senate sponsor of the bill. And I know that he is a strong supporter of the bill as well. So we're going to do everything we can to get it across the finish line. What help do we need from you all? Well, we need you to come down and testify. We are allowing in-person testimony. We are allowing virtual testimony, but you can't change your mind after you decide which one you want to do. And we are allowing folks to come down to protest here in Annapolis. So come down, make some noise, make your voices heard. I'm definitely getting voices being heard from the opposition. So I want to hear you all's voices as well. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here tonight. Thank you for your questions. I tried to answer them as best as I could. And the one on Ethan's Law, I believe Karen might be able to answer that. And if she can't, I can follow up and I can answer and provide that to Karen. So take care, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Delegate Bartlett. We are so very grateful for your sponsorship this year, and we're really hopeful that we see this through to the end this year, so we can raise the standard of what is considered responsible gun ownership. Questions I will try to get to at the end of the program if I can. So anything about Ethan's Law, let's save that until the very end. Let's try to get through what we have. But speaking of Jalen's Law and Ethan's Law for that matter, there are just far too many stories of families who realize way too late that they could have done this very simple thing and prevented the loss of their loved one, not to mention the scenarios where it's someone else's family member that is injured or killed. So with that,
Can I just address one question that I think is very pertinent and one issue I didn't get to, and that is with respect to the implications and the liability. Let me just tell you really quickly and very briefly. So what we're doing is increasing the time. So if you don't store your gun properly, you can face up to 90 days or a fine of $1,000 or both. If you make the gun accessible in a way that a child could gains access to it and harms someone or leaves it in a location where a child could easily gain access to it, you could be facing 2 years imprisonment or a fine of $2,500 or both. And if you do not store your firearm properly and a child gains access and they harm someone, themselves or another, then you could be subject to 3 years or a fine not exceeding $5,000 or both. So like I said, the intent is not to go too high with the fines, but the intent needs to be clear that this is not something that we take lightly. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
So with that, I will turn to what you as citizens can do to support us in our efforts. with these changes. I previously dropped in the chat, and I think Bonnie can recopy it for you if it needs to be put back up again. A few documents that are designed to give you an overview of the priorities that we've talked about. The response to Bruin document and the Child Access Prevention, or CAP, one pager. In addition, there's a basics of state advocacy document that provides an overview of what the legislative process looks like in Maryland. We are at the very beginning of the 3-month legislative session. It opened last Wednesday. Bill language is still being drafted. I think Delegate Bartlett's bill is about to drop very soon.
No, it's gone.
It's already gone. Excellent.
Yeah.
So we should
Well,
have all that soon.
Actually, I take that back. Nope, Karen, I'm sorry. It's not gone, but I do have a lot of co-sponsors who are signing on.
Oh,
And
yay.
so, yes, I have gotten a bunch of co-sponsors. I wanted to tell you all the good news on that.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
Yep.
So with respect to the Bruin language documents, those things are still being worked on and modified during this phase. Bill numbers are assigned as the bills actually get introduced to the floor. So a lot of people like to have those bill numbers before they start doing outreach to legislators. You don't have to. You can certainly call and talk to your legislators without those numbers. But as soon as we have those numbers, we'll pass those along to you in case that's something that you'd like to have in your hands. Please refer to our website. We have a folder on our website entitled 2023 Legislative Resources, where the documents I've already mentioned, those things are posted, and then I'll also be putting updates in there with things like bill numbers as well. So I have some instructions up there for how to submit written testimony, some guidance. Actually it's not there yet, but there will be some guidance for providing live testimony should you wish to do so. For the first time ever, as Delegate Bartlett mentioned, both houses of the General Assembly are providing the opportunity to testify in person or virtually. My guess is there will be a few bumps in the road with this, but I very much applaud the access to the democratic process that this actually gives to people. It's not always easy for people to take off an entire day and wait around for hours and hours and hours to be able to testify. So being able to do so and having the option of virtual, I think, is an access to the democratic process that is really, really needed. And I think if COVID showed us anything, is that it was possible. Our friends, and let's see what else I have. Our friends at Moms Demand Action are hosting an advocacy day on January 31st. If you'd like to go and be a part, their event will start off with a rally and will lead to the opportunity to share resources and to speak with legislators. And with that, I think, okay, so next up, I think I saw Mr. Ludke had joined. So we are very excited to be able to say this year that we have somebody here from the governor's office. Eric Ludke served most recently as House Majority Leader in the Maryland General Assembly. He hails from District 14 in Montgomery County, which he represented in the House for over 10 years. Mr. Ludke has a long history of public service, which, among other things, includes teaching in the Montgomery County public school system and at the University of Maryland College Park. He is the new Chief Legislative Officer for our brand new governor. He also very recently pulled the rug out from under our little organization by spiriting away our executive director to serve as one of his deputies. Hi, Miles. I saw you were on here as well. So yeah, thanks for that. But seriously, we are very excited for Miles and for this new era of what will hopefully prove to be meaningful work to bring down gun violence in the state of Maryland. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chief.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thanks for the invitation, and apologies for stealing Miles, I guess, although I feel bad for the organization, but on the other hand, he's so fantastic. I'm really excited to have him in the administration as one of our deputy legislative officers. So for a little over 24 hours now, I've been the chief legislative officer for Governor Wes Moore, and Miles has been one of our deputy legislative officers who, among other things, is going to have public safety in his portfolio and will be working on a lot of these issues. For those of you that were not able to listen to the governor's inaugural speech yesterday, I'll point you to a line he used in that speech. That is a line he's used throughout his campaign to achieve that office. which is that Marylanders have every right to both feel safe in their communities and safe in their own skin. And that is kind of the guiding mantra of the administration's approach to public safety. Of course, we need to be doing the work necessary to make sure that public safety in our communities is equitable and is fair and is responsive to real community needs. But we also need to do the work to make sure that all Marylanders are safe in their communities and their homes. And I think if you watch the news at all today, you'll note that one of the first things the governor did after taking office as governor was to meet with Attorney General Brown and our U.S. Attorney Eric Barron to have conversations about public safety. Gun violence is a core part of that conversation about public safety. And it's about the incredible and horrific rate of gun homicides that we've seen. It's also about the unacceptably high rate of gun suicides that we've seen in our communities. And the governor places a very high priority on those issues and will make them a core part of his governorship. We are still in the process of seeing the bills that the legislature is introducing and talking about them. But many of the issues that you've talked about tonight are being talked about in the administration as well. And we're looking to partner with legislators as we go through these conversations during session. And in particular, I appreciate the focus of Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence on trying to address the serious harm that the Supreme Court did to our nation's gun laws in the Bruin decision. That was one in what has turned out to be a string of very poor decisions out of the current Supreme Court. And states like Maryland have a real challenge in that, we have to follow federal law and we have to respond to federal law. But it's important that we craft our laws, whatever the Supreme Court does, in the best way that we can to make sure Marylanders are safe. So I appreciate the work of Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence on the Bruin decision. I know that both Chairman Clippinger in the House of Delegates and some of his colleagues in the House of Delegates and Chairman Smith in the Senate and some of his colleagues in the Senate are very focused on trying to come up with solutions that will survive further court challenges and also ensure that concealed carry permits don't end up, frankly, in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. So I want to thank you. I want to close by saying this. There are now almost 70 people still on this call after the 75 you had earlier. One of the wonders of our democracy is citizen participation and the opportunity to engage. And on this issue in particular, in my time in the legislature, we saw a sea change in the conversation about gun safety. And it happened because following the shootings at Sandy Hook and the shootings at Parkland, Florida, we saw an unprecedented wave of citizen participation in debates about these issues and advocacy on these issues. So those of you that have participated in that, thank you. You have altered the trajectory of public policy in Maryland by engaging. And I thank you for your participation tonight and your continued advocacy with Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence on these issues in the future. So thank you, Karen, very much for asking me here. I really appreciate it. And thank you for not hating me for stealing miles from.
Yeah, just a little bit of public ribbing. That's all you really have to deal with from me. Thank you very much. And we are really grateful to the Moore administration for the support and totally understandable that you haven't actually made complete decisions on all of the bills on your first day in office.
We're trying. We're doing our best, but it's been a very busy 24 hours.
I bet. I appreciate you being here tonight. We are really hopeful that we are in a moment now to make real movement in gun violence in Maryland. So thank you again for your help tonight and appreciate your joining us.
Sure.
So moving on, we know again, and I've said this before, gun violence is a multifaceted problem and it will not be fixed overnight or with any single piece of legislation. We know that it's not just about the gun. And we are very encouraged by other things that we are seeing moving forward, from workforce development to funding for violence intervention workers, teaching conflict resolution in middle schools, victim compensation. All of these things are relevant to fight and reduce gun violence. But as much as reducing gun violence is affected by these things, it is also critically very much about the easy access to firearms. We can have a Second Amendment, but still create a system of regulation and oversight that requires that those people who choose to bear arms do so responsibly and in a way that does not reduce or eliminate the rights of those around them. So I want to share my screen one more time, hopefully for the last time, because I'm finding that part less than exciting. Okay. Okay, so I did want to take a moment to go over a few other gun violence prevention related legislation that's been introduced. I've told you about the things that we are focusing on, responding to Bruin and safe storage, but there have, and I'm sure that there will be more other pieces of legislation that are relevant to this issue that you might be interested in tracking, and that we'll try to help you track along the way. Depending on how smoothly things go with our priority legislation, we might be more supportive in moving forward with some of these other pieces. We are a tiny organization, so we do what we can. So there's SB 86 from Senator Waldstreicher. That is a rifles and shotguns possession age requirement, so raising the age. I think it's to 21 for rifles and shotguns, which is currently 18. SB 113, also Waldstreicher. He has introduced the Firearm Industry Accountability Act of 2023, which is designed to create a cause of action under the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. You may have heard it referred to as PLACA. SB 118 from Senator Lee, prohibitions on wearing, carrying, or transporting firearms. This is an alternate approach to the sensitive places legislation that I've previously talked about. Delegate Solomon is planning to have an active shooter drill requirements bill, which sets some parameters for parental notification, advance notice, data tracking to minimize the harm that we're hearing some of these drills are causing. Senator Hettleman and Delegate Moon have a Maryland voluntary do not sell firearm registry establishment, which is exactly what it sounds like. It allows someone who recognizes that they are in distress to add themselves to a do not sell list to help prevent a future impulsive act. And then I don't know if Delegate Bartlett's still on the call or not, but she also has HB 3, which is related to firearms surrendered under final protection orders. In addition, our organization is also looking to provide at least some written support, if not more, to efforts surrounding workforce development, early identification of dyslexia, criminal injuries compensation, conflict resolution in middle schools. Basically, these are items that are identified as barriers to success and or recovery in areas that are disproportionately affected by gun violence. We also, as an organization, will usually attempt to oppose pieces of legislation from legislators who are attempting to allow more free access to firearms, depending upon whether or not it makes any sense or not. But we do oppose expansion of those things. Okay, so hopefully you got that. And with that, let's see where we are. We are almost out of time. I knew we weren't going to have a whole lot of time for questions. I can take one or two, I suppose, but for the most part, hopefully you put your questions in the chat, and I know my helpers were trying to answer things. If anyone has anything pressing, raise your hand and we'll try to squeeze you in. I'll finish up my final comments while I look to see if there's anybody with a raised hand. I thank you for your all being here tonight and for your willingness to both learn about our priorities and how you may get involved. Please monitor our social media and our supporter emails as well, and we will post supportive documents and share details of legislation with you as that stuff becomes available. Again, remember on our website, there's a folder, 2023 legislative folder, where I'll pop things in. I think Gabby can help there, but I think they go in sort of in the order that they get posted. So the ones at the top would be the newest ones. You can email me at karen@mdpgv.org if you would like to be on our regular calls. If you didn't already put your information in the chat, we'll get some of that out of there. Please also visit our website, and you can donate to our organization should you so want to. I'll keep this window open. I don't see any hands raised. We are right at the end, so thank you for having your questions in the chat, but I'll keep this window open for a few minutes in case there's information that you want to copy down that you didn't already get. I apologize to any of your friends who may have been attempting to watch on Facebook because that failed completely. Sorry about that. I did record this, so if we need recordings of it distributed, please reach out to me and let me know. I don't know whether or not we'll post the recording just to be out there publicly, but I'll talk about that with people who know more about how that works, and we'll figure that part out. And with that, I think, I had one more thing I wanted to add in the chat, which is the link for mom's sign up for lobby day, unless one of my mom's people on here has it easily accessible to them and can pop it in the chat. Let me see if I can get it for you. They have a sign up for their lobby day, which I said was the 31st. I will most likely be there. And if you are interested, they would like to know what their numbers are looking like. So they have asked for you to sign up ahead. Almost there. Okay, I think that's their link. Okay, and with that, good night.